This week, Nvidia released their Q4 2022 earnings. Yeah, in the middle of February of the following year. That's just how Nvidia does things. And unsurprisingly, they reported a down quarter relative to the previous year, like many companies in semiconductors right now. Although, if we are being honest, they seemed more like an AMD situation than an Intel one. This may be a down market, but some companies are doing way better than others, and so, yeah, well, Nvidia's earnings weren't good. Similar to AMD, they were better than some people predicted, and they don't seem like their future is in question at all. Although, they did have a massive amount of inventory reported, backing up my leaks about Ampere oversupply and constricting stock recently. So, yeah, Nvidia is doing okayish in a down market, but they are definitely hoarding stock to keep margins high right now. And really, that's all I had to say at first about Nvidia's earnings this week. Well, until I saw a tweet from HXL on Twitter that noted something quite interesting. AMD's gaming revenue is not that far behind Nvidia's, which calls into question the conventional wisdom I so often see people repeat online that Nvidia's gaming market share dwarfs AMD by some ridiculous margin. It doesn't seem like it does if you look at actual official numbers. Now, I understand that before I even get into the data or what my overall point is with it, that there's probably an army of keyboard warriors typing in all caps right now about to bring up the internet's premier gaming cafe data duplicator, the Steam Hardware Survey. A survey that, when I speak to analysts behind the scenes, they are tired of having to reference or feeling like they need to look at because it just doesn't seem to consistently correlate with the publicly reported data from these companies. And there's a lot of evidence out there that every time someone logs into one of those internet cafe gaming stations, they are just logging in and telling Steam that they use a 1065 gigabyte or some other cheapo variant of like a 1650 that's out there, and they are having their station counted multiple times. And Nvidia has contracts selling these cards to internet cafes all over Asia, inflating their numbers. And in fact, every time I look into my AMD and my Nvidia systems, I do notice that my Nvidia systems seem to get pinged for that survey way more often than AMD. Now, I wouldn't double down on anything there specifically, but something just doesn't seem to add up with the data. Analysts tell me they don't really trust it. I don't trust it. And now we have Q4 earnings from both of these companies that suggests it's just off. And let's get into those now. So if we look at AMD's Q4 gaming revenue from their gaming segment, they reported $1.644 billion in revenue, while the overall company, AMD, had 51% margins. Meanwhile, at the same time, Nvidia reported in their gaming segment $1.831 billion in revenue, with an overall margin of 66.1% for the company. Higher margins than AMD. All right, so Nvidia has higher margins, and yet their revenue is only 10% higher. Now, to be fair, AMD includes console sales, the PlayStation and the Xbox, in their gaming revenue. But Nvidia also includes their Switch sales. And if you look it up, in yearly sales, they're not that different than the yearly unit sales that AMD is getting out of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X/S. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess you can say that AMD's probably getting more money per SoC in one of those more expensive consoles than Nvidia is getting in a Switch. But at the same time, you know, Nvidia's higher margins, and they include GeForce Now in their gaming revenue. AMD doesn't have some other thing in there. And all that is to say, if AMD's gaming revenue in Q4 is only 10% behind Nvidia, both companies are selling a similar amount of consoles, but AMD's consoles cost more. But at the same time, Nvidia includes GeForce Now and has higher margins. This suggests at a minimum that Nvidia does not have 90% of gaming discrete market share, or probably even 80%. And that ultimately gets me to an early point I have to make in this video. My point is not that AMD secretly has half of discrete graphics market share or something silly like that. And I'm not even convinced that it's necessarily at least at a third of the market. But I have seen a lot of people overly quoting these surveys and other data points online suggesting that Radeon only has like 10 or 20% of the market. And in the data that shareholders can sue these companies over, it does not suggest that. So when you see recent releases from AMD, like the 7900 XTX, sell gangbusters, It's probably because it is actually selling gangbusters and holding a certain part of the market that's larger than a lot of people think. And when you see me put out a poll on Twitter, and I also put it on Twitter specifically because I know a lot of people on Twitter aren't fans of mine and are more likely to not be biased. And I know that poll, from what I saw, was shared in a lot of discords outside of Moore's Law is Dead. When you see that suggest AMD is close to about a third of the market, maybe they are close to a third of the market. Or when you look at recent sales on Mind Factory that everyone liked to quote as being some gold standard for the 4070 Ti, and it suggests that AMD has like 30 to 40% of discrete market share. I don't know if it's that high globally. It probably isn't. That's just one data point. But for sure, AMD does not just hold 10 or 20% of the market in discrete market share. There's a lot of surveys and sets of data being shown online, I believe, that are either massively missing something with the discrete gaming market share between these two companies, or they're counting shipments that were not going to gamers. They were probably going to data center or to miners. And in reality, AMD actually still holds an okay amount of market share in discrete graphics. Is that 25%, 30%, 35%? I wouldn't bet on it because I just don't think we know for sure, at least not yet. And to be clear, I think AMD still has a massive mindshare deficit to Nvidia that will make it very hard in the foreseeable future for them to ever come close to 50% GPU market share. But I'm not so sure that holding 30 or 35% of the market is going to be as hard as some people seem to think. If AMD got their heads out of their asses and actually priced their mid-range graphics cards where they should be to sell well. Because if they did, I don't think it's like 9 out of 10 gamers will ignore AMD. I think AMD knows that's not true, and they're going to have to do something soon this summer to go for market share. And actually, recent reports from DigiTimes and indeed the data in AMD's own Q4 earnings suggest that whether AMD wanted to or not, they're going to have to be more reasonable with pricing, and they're going to have to go for market share this summer. The money, the data does not lie, and I want to talk about what that is, what suggests AMD has to go for market share soon. But first, an ad from a sponsor. All Jesse wants for Valentine's Day is to get a hold of one of them geese and maybe get some extra naps in. But if you're a gamer like me and you're building a new PC, you probably just want recently priced Microsoft keys, and if so, go to cdkeyoffer.com this Valentine's Day. This piece of content is brought to you by cdkeyoffer.com. There's just no reason to pay exorbitant monopolistic prices for Microsoft Office or Microsoft operating systems anymore. Not when you have someone like cdkeyoffer.com, who's been a fantastic sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead for many years now. If you're looking for anything from Steam games, Origin games, Uplay games, or PlayStation keys, or reasonably priced Microsoft software, go to cdkeyoffer.com today, click the links in the description, and use the offer codes BrokenSilicon for 25% off Microsoft keys and DieShrink for 3% off everything else on the website. Don't be like Jesse here, who's chewing on my chair right now. Be smart, don't overpay for online software, and go to cdkeyoffer.com today. Alrighty, now let's start off the second part of this video by being very clear about one thing. AMD has a decent amount of inventory they're holding, just like Nvidia, roughly twice as much as reported in their previous Q4 earnings report, which, relatively speaking, seems like they're in a similar situation to Nvidia in oversupply. Relatively speaking. But here's the thing. It's not like because Nvidia has more market share than AMD in discrete graphics that they necessarily want or usually have a ton more unused inventory compared to AMD. That wastes money either way. And if you look at past earnings, these companies, AMD, Nvidia, frequently share similar inventory levels. So while it is important to look at things in relative terms, that is often important. Absolute terms sometimes matter just as much or more than relative, and in absolute terms right now, AMD seems to have around 2.5 times the inventory they usually have, and Nvidia seems to have 4 times as much inventory as they usually have. And this all lines up with what I've been reporting consistently in recent months, that both RDNA 2 and Ampere have oversupply issues, but that Nvidia's oversupply issue dwarfs AMD. It does. Their earnings show it. And furthermore, AMD reported this in December. That's when AMD reports their earnings, or that's where their numbers come from that they report in their earnings. And they have continued to drop prices on their graphics cards since December, letting the 6950 XT go from $800 from their own website in December to $700 now early in 2023. Nvidia isn't selling these cards from their website. They're not letting their prices go down, and they reported their inventory levels a month after AMD. So think about that. Not only are the numbers reporting in inventory twice as bad as AMD, relatively speaking, compared to where they would normally be, but they're a month later than AMD. In this past month or two, AMD has already dropped the price on the 6950 XT, for example, from $800 to $700, and they've dropped the prices on all other type of cards. By now, by the time Nvidia actually reported the numbers we saw this week, I'm sure AMD's inventory levels had gone down lower, and so there's just no way around it, and this is when we tie into my recent content. Me reporting that Nvidia was constraining supply on the 4090 or Ampere, trickling things out so the pricing floor does not fall out in anything at once. And then anytime they have an oversupply of something they can't get rid of, they probably just send it to Datacenter because Datacenter wants Nvidia cards at a discount. That's got to be true. You can see it in their earnings. And AMD isn't doing that. And it's because, well, AMD can't. And that gets me to the overall point on why AMD kind of has to go for market share this year. When I talk about this tightrope walk that Nvidia is doing, where they constrain supply of the 4090 and then Ampere, and then they try to push you to get a 4080 and jump all over the place, all of that is happening because Nvidia knows that they sell these cards into enough professional markets that if they hold them there, there's a good chance that even if the floor fell out in graphics, in gaming consumer graphics, they could probably sell them for half off to Datacenter easy. It's risky. They are leaving themselves exposed if AMD dumped a ton of supply into the gaming market and took it before Nvidia liquidated Ampere. Nvidia is taking a risk, but it's not as big of a risk because they have Datacenter to fall back on. AMD doesn't. When I talk to people in Datacenter right now, it just seems worse than ever. They don't want AMD cards for professional use. They want Nvidia cards. And so AMD knows that they kind of have to liquidate graphics as soon as possible because if AMD's caught holding that bad, they cannot dump it into Datacenter like Nvidia can. And they have bought up a ton of TSMC supply for RDNA 3 graphics cards, as reported by DigiTimes, and as reported by me recently, that before RDNA 3 came out, I have conversations with people connected to the very top of AMD that said in meetings they were talking about how they really are excited for RDNA 3 to go toe-to-toe with Lovelace and take market share, and if RDNA 3 underperformed, then they would just have to lower prices. This is what we're seeing soon. AMD is liquidating RDNA 2 now because they bought up a bunch of RDNA 3 supply for gamers that they can't use for anything else easily. They can't easily dump that into Datacenter. And so I do believe that by this summer, AMD has got to price their RDNA 3 graphics cards wherever they need to be to sell, and they need to sell them in high volume because they bought up a ton of capacity. And to be fair to AMD, from what I'm hearing, they are ramping up 7900 XTX supply soon. Hopefully in about a month or so, you should start seeing the one card that they can't keep in stock at MSRP arrive in greater numbers. And I think what they're focusing on right now is, okay, well, we overproduced the 7900 XT. We probably should have saved more of those yields that we could for the XTX. Let's fix that now. In the meantime, let's try to also make sure we just liquidate RDNA 2 and work on RDNA 3 drivers, because there's no point in launching Navi 33 or Navi 32, you know, the products that will make up the 7600 through 7800 XT, the mid-range lineup of RDNA 3. There's really no point in launching those until you know if you will scrape back 5, 10, or 20% performance after driver improvements. From what I continue to hear, AMD does believe their drivers for RDNA 3 are immature, that this radical new architecture they bit off more than they could chew for an optimized launch, and they want to do a big marketing push with driver improvements with FSR 3 early summer before they launch the mid-range. I guess the final thing I will say then is I can't promise you AMD will succeed. I'm telling you in this video, it's not me hoping. AMD has to go for graphics market share here. Their data center appeal for RDNA 3 right now isn't very good. They bought up a ton of capacity, and they've got to use it for something, and that's gamers. So they're going to try. But I can't promise you they won't make the same stupid mistakes they did like they have recently with some launches, where they priced a product probably 10% above where it was supposed to be, and then the market, whether AMD liked it or not, started selling it for way less than they intended. I can't promise you they'll be perfectly smart, but I can promise you that all data out there suggests that their mind share is a bit better than people think, as long as they undercut Nvidia by at least 20%, and that they have to. They have to at least try to go for market share finally in gaming. And at least to me, that's exciting. Alrighty then, that's going to just about do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit the like button and that you share it, and then also check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. Recent statistics on YouTube suggest that about 3/4 of you are not subscribed. If you're not subscribed, make sure you get subscribed and ring the bell button so you don't miss the upcoming content. And if you're enjoying that content a lot, understand that there's also more content out there for you if you support us for even $2 a month or more on Patreon. You'll get early ad-free access to Broken Silicon, exclusive podcasts that are ad-free, and the ability to ask me and the co-host Dan and guests questions. And then you get free reader mail on the live streams, access to the Discord, and there's tons of stuff out there for you. Moore's Law is Dead cannot function without a thriving Patreon, and we're looking to add a lot more stuff to the channel if we can get to the next goal. But we got to get to the next Patreon goal. So support us if you have the extra money. But otherwise, for everybody else, just thank you for watching.